Hey guys, wanted to take a little moment to chat about something that came up on a live stream the other day where a person was talking about whether or not to push some issues with their ex, file some complaints, take them back for contempt. And it brought up a discussion that I think is really important because when you're in the middle of this or when you're in the beginning of this, more of in the beginning of this, you have a tendency to want to really hold the other person accountable. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I've seen over the course of doing this channel for quite a while now and having the opportunity to talk to various people and get their stories and their personal experience, oftentimes people will regret engaging in those type of activities because it has a tendency to kind of spiral out of control. And to be clear right off the bat, I am not talking about really critical issues. And what I mean by really critical issues, I mean visitation isn't happening. You're being maybe smeared and it's actually starting to affect your job or something like that. Everything else, you really have to take a hard look at and ask yourself the question is it really worth it? Because every time we open Pandora's box, things have a potential to go differently than we expect. And I can tell you from my personal experience, that's exactly what happened in a lot of different things. I thought things would happen a certain way. I expected things to play out a certain way, and ultimately they didn't. And I also realized that at that time, it was nearly impossible for me to think of doing something differently because I was so angry. I was so frustrated. I was just, sick of it all. And effectively, I was tired of jumping through flaming hoops and seeing the ex get away with everything, get away with murder. So it's really important to really, really, really think about what you're pushing for. Because most of the time, there's going to be consequences for that. And it's going to be more of a fight than you probably anticipate. Oftentimes we think, or we look at it and we think, okay, this is simple. Anyone with common sense will see this and realize that this is a stupid argument. Remember, people who like this type of stuff love the chaos. They love the fight. It's like the analogy of fighting a pig in mud. You're both going to get muddy. The difference is the pig likes it. And you really have to think about that. I can look back over the course of 8 years now at, not so much in the last 4 or 5 or 3 to 4, the decisions that I've made that in retrospect, I wish I wouldn't have. They've actually made my life a little bit more complicated. You really, really, really have to think about what you're hoping to accomplish, what the realistic outcome might be. Like for instance, and I think one of the topics, if I remember correctly, that came up, they were talking about, my kids are saying that the other parent is locking them in the bathroom for 10 minutes when they're in trouble. And it's like, okay, would a reasonable person see that as abuse? Would the court see it as that? So it's like you got to look at the severity of the issue and what the argument really is. Because see, here's the risk. If you make something an issue and you really push it, and most people don't see it the same way you do, you've lost your credibility. And as soon as that happens, your family court is already, people don't really believe everything. They're very suspect of it. So it takes significant information and a very poignant or targeted argument to really drive the point home. And if you go in with something that most people are going to be like, seriously, you're in court for this, I mean, you've already lost. And let me tell you, if you fight a narcissistic, toxic person and you lose and they win, they will be emboldened, and it will get tremendously worse. So you have to really be careful about that, and you really have to think long and hard about what you're planning on doing. Now, don't take this as saying, you have to roll over and take it all, because there's a caveat with this, that a lot of time you're going to struggle with that part of it. I mean, I know I did. I mean, that's the reason why at the 2 or 3 year mark, I can't remember what year it was, but that I took my ex, I sued my ex in small claims court, because I didn't want to go to family court, because I didn't want to have to pay an attorney, and I obviously didn't want to open Pandora's box with custody and child support and everything. So I sued her in small claims court for not paying medical bills. And that risk, there was a cost to it, and it was an expensive cost ultimately, but it did stop that action, right? And prior to that, I was just getting sick of constantly getting collection notices about bills that weren't being paid. Like I've mentioned in the past, I haven't talked about this in a while, but she would get the bills. They would come to her house. She wouldn't pay them whenever they would get to collections, and it was like, final notice or triple final notice, or said, it's a collection agency was doing it. She would just write my address on the envelope, which is why my credit report shows me as living in her house, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it, because I can't get anyone to change the addresses. Bottom line is, how would I say this? If it's not seriously affecting your life, think about if it's worth it. Like I said in the beginning of this, there's a lot of people, especially in the early parts of the channel when the content was more focused on that part of our the beginning part of all this. I had a lot of people who would email me and say, I made a mistake. I took the person back to court for more child support, or mainly it was that, and all hell broke loose. And that's the thing. You really have to think about what's happening. I mean, here's my thought. If you're able to undo the parental alienation to the point to where it's not taking hold and you're able to maintain a good relationship with your kids, the key on that is when they're with you, how they act when they're with you. That's part of it. And the rest of it is just the other abuses that are happening. I mean, obviously, if you're just getting nickeled and dimed and you can't deal with it anymore, you have to make your own decision, but be really careful about it, because every time we dip our toe into that water, we are playing their game. We are playing their game. We are basically falling into their trap, and they're comfortable there. And I would imagine everyone watching this, you having to deal with your ex in that type of scenario, and then you're dealing with attorney fees or increased payments or whatever. Is it worth it? And that's kind of what the guiding point on me is. I've everything I've looked at now going forward, because I was beat down really early on. It's like, okay, is it really, really worth it? Is it worth the risk to my peace and my sanity to fight it? Sometimes the answer is yes. 90% of the time, at least in my case, the answer is no. So I know that is a tough, actually just thinking about it's making my eye twitch. That's a tough thing to reconcile. So if you're struggling with that, leave a comment down below on what your particular issues and how you're dealing with it. If you've had some successes with this with what I'm talking about and being able to readdress how you deal with it, I'd like to hear about that as well. If you know somebody who's struggling with this and can use this video, please share it with them. And I'll chat with you on the next video. Take care. Bye.